Hello everyone and welcome back. In the next couple of lessons we're going to be talking about error handling in a reactive application. So we are going to be implementing a very common error messages panel functionality that we're going to be adding here to the top part of our application, right below here, the top menu bar. This will be an error messages panel that is going to be closable, that is going to allow us to display an error message to the user from multiple places in our application. We are going to be able to, for example, display an error message to the user if something goes wrong here in our home component. In a very similar way to the previous case of the loading indicator, the case of modal dialogues is a little bit different. So in the case of a modal dialog, we want to display the error message to the user here on top of the modal dialog so that the user can fix locally here any errors that might be present before closing the dialog. So in order to help us with the implementation of this messages component, we already have here an initial skeleton for our functionality. Here inside the messages folder, we have here a messages component template, which is currently empty. We have here a messages component that currently only implements here the onInit method and has here an onClose empty method. And we also have here a messages component CSS file that contains a little bit of CSS that we're going to be needing in order to display the error messages to the user. As we can see, this is going to be a panel with a red background. Let's now start to put in place our solution for a messages component, and we're going to see how adopting a reactive approach is going to again make it very simple for different parts of the application to interact in a decoupled and transparent way with the error messages panel. Let's start with the messages component template. The messages component is going to be made of a container containing a list of messages. Our container is going to have the CSS class messages container, and inside it we're going to loop through a list of errors. Each error is going to have the CSS class message. Let's use the Angular ng4 directive in order to loop through a list of errors. Let's say that we have here an errors property. In that case, we are going to use the syntax let error of errors in order to loop through our list of errors, and then each of these errors, which is going to be a string, is going to get displayed directly here on the screen using the Angular template interpolation syntax. Our messages container panel is going to be a red background panel that is going to extend here over the whole length of our application, and we're going to have here a small close button. So we are going to be adding here the close button. This is going to be a material icon. The icon that we are going to be displaying is going to be the close icon, which corresponds to a close cross. And we're going to give this icon a CSS class, which is going to be the close class. Whenever the user clicks on this icon, then we're going to be calling the onClose function. This function is responsible for hiding the whole messages container from the user. Now let's see how the onClose functionality is going to get implemented. So initially our component is going to be showing or hiding the messages from the user depending on the value of a show messages flag that we're going to set here in our messages component and that we are going to initialize to false. So initially there are no errors to be shown to the user, so we are going to hide our error messages panel in order to avoid displaying to the user an empty panel. Let's switch back here to our template and let's use the Angular ngIf directive in order to show or hide the messages container depending on the value of the show messages flag. Now whenever we click here on onClose, then we want to hide the panel from the user, so we need to set show messages to false. Now the question is, at which point does this flag turn to true? This flag is going to turn to true if we get some errors from somewhere else in our application that we want to display to the user. Now the question is, how will the rest of the application interact with our messages component in a decoupled way? As we have seen before, in the case of the loading indicator, we can achieve this decoupled component communication in a very simple way by using a shared service with an observable-based API. So that's what we're going to be building in our next lesson. We're going to be building a messages service that is going to allow us to interact in a decoupled way with the messages component.